normal temperature for you, Joe, in the day?
This time of year, I'd say, let's say 50 is.
Yeah, 50. That's yeah. We don't ever 50. That's probably 30. I'm guessing. I don't know. Is that hot or is it not?
No, it's not hot.
Mm. Then it's not even 20 here, probably. Yeah. Yeah, fair enough. Do you think we are all here, or are we still waiting a little bit?
Well, some people are flowing in, but we can probably, how about we start doing our normal introduction, quick overview. We're mixing it up a little bit today, and I'm going to demonstrate the, this time it's a function instead of a script, but same difference. And then we're going to turn it over to Mason, who's going to lead us in using classes in AutoHotkey with an overview or tutorial. And then after all that, we will unmute everybody, or at least let me restate that to say we'll set it where you can unmute yourself if you have a question that you want to ask. Of course, at any of this time, you can raise your hand and ask a question. All right.
Yeah.
So here are, so this is me. I'm Joe Glines. And Jackie, my colleague who's talking right now, also is on the phone. Jackie, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Jackie, and just like I'm here. I think I've been with you on all of these up until now, at least. So yeah, I have my own site also about AutoHotkey, and yeah, use AutoHotkey almost every day at work. So yeah, love it. Feel like we need to share it with more people. So hey.
Yeah, and I started talking. I reached out to Jackie. This is about a little over 2 years ago now, I think. Where he is known as Black Holyman on the AutoHotkey forum, and I would ask questions mostly about web scraping or the DOM or COM, and I, after 30 posts where I noticed like he kept answering my questions. Right, he was the guy that kept answering almost anything I asked. And then I happened to notice he had a website, so I reached out to him just to say thank you. And we started talking, and him and I both neither of us are programmers. He is definitely far longer along that line than I am, but we understand AutoHotkey. We love it. It's a passion. We love teaching people and trying to get people to adopt it and use it.
That's for sure.
Yeah, which is at times, it works, and at times it's just more painful that people see the benefits, but then they just don't adopt. But hey, we do what we can, right?
Yeah.
And then you know what I think about it was last year at this time, I think is when we did an AutoHotkey user survey. And so if you have any interest in that, that's on both of our websites. You can see the results to it, but it was pretty interesting to see who uses AutoHotkey, how they're using it, their backgrounds, what they've been using it for, the other types of programs they use. And now that I think about it, I think we talked about having a couple more, another survey with similar questions, but some other things that we didn't bring up in it. So that's where we are there. Let's go to the next slide here. So as I mentioned earlier, everybody starts off muted, and that is just because we don't want everyone trying to talk over each other, because it gets quite confusing if you have 30 people trying to talk at the same time. But there is the chat, and pop open the chat, and depending on who's talking at the time, usually if I'm talking, Jackie's looking at the chat, and if he's talking, I'm trying to monitor the chat. But one of us will take a look at your question there, and then depending if it's too complex of a question, we might just unmute you then. So feel free to ask questions as we go. You're muted not because we're trying to stifle conversation. It's just because it gets unwieldy with this many people.
We had people unmuted and a couple of the first webinars, and it wasn't because it couldn't be managed, but it was it was a lot of people talking at the same time. It was hard to actually hear who was asking what.
So someone asked if they can record the webinar. You definitely can. We thankfully, because Jackie just reminded me again, we are recording it right now. And then what we'll do is after today, because things will come up during the webinar that people will bring up other resources that Jackie and I weren't aware of. We will go back and update the deck we have here, and then we will post the links to the videos as well as other resources and make them available to everybody. But you definitely can record it if you want.
Yeah. We'll make the recording freely available, so if you want to do it yourself, you're welcome to do that as also. So yeah.
All right. So as I mentioned, this time I don't know if everyone has seen and used the notify script or function. Let me pull up here. If this is the web page where you can read more about it. It's pretty awesome. It's a nice, easy function that has some incredible functionality in it. And so, you know what? If it's not in there, just so you can see it. So that is the URL behind that. But I have this is the actual function, which I'm not going to open that in this. But the this is just a bunch of function calls demonstrating the function, this notify function. So after you've included that in your library somewhere, you can just run this, and this script will give you an overall idea. So let me go ahead and run it here. And it's going through, and I would never recommend you do all of these, right? This is just demonstrating a lot of the different options that you can do. And you can set timers, you can have them look different things, you can include images, you can have it paused. So this one right here now, it's paused until I click this. The second I click it, it'll all go away, and then it starts doing the second one. I like this. You can even have animated stuff for like you're installing something. It's just a great, easy function that's easy to call. It looks pretty polished. So especially if I give a script to a client or a friend and it has any sort of like looping or some sort of process, I like doing these because it just looks better, and it's easier because you can stack them and it will not overlay each other. So I find it very helpful. This next one, I'm going to click there, and now it actually here, this is just demonstrating the second I click this. Right now you can see my little green H here. That script is running. But when I click it, it kills the script. Right, that's built into here to tell it to go ahead and kill the script once it's running.
Again, it's a really nice add-on to almost any type of thing where you need to inform the user in something that's not a message box or tooltip.
Right. Especially because you can have them, they'll fade away, very easily too. Of course, you can do that with a message box, but the fact they don't overlay each other, when I'm doing like some web scraping or I'm going to go do a bunch of stuff that's like a process, I will have it, or especially API calls, right, where I'm like, oh, I need to log in, and then I need to submit it, and then I got to say, did I get the stuff back? Yes, okay. And the next step, it's just a nice, easy way to very quickly, provide information.
Yeah, and I love that it simply just moves them up, and you can have multiple messages on screen at the same time without actually blocking the script. So yeah, that's.
So I see a question from Joe. If Notify works in version 2 of AutoHotkey, I haven't tested it. Let's see if he mentioned it.
I don't think that version 2 was that much up at the time when Notify was actually made. Mm-hmm. So I'm not sure that he has actually made any statement about it.
Oh, gotcha. Right.
Yeah. I would believe that it would work because I don't think that it does anything that's way outside of AutoHotkey's normal functionality. So I would believe that it would also work for version 2.
I'm trying to see if I can drag it on there and just test this. I'm trying to remember. I guess I have the path in the other one. AHK function. Okay, this is the structure of where I saved it on my. So, AHK functionality. No. if I in here? So if I drag this on there, right, that should. So apparently, at least maybe with the way the function call is written, it won't work. But we can test that out and verify it's just the way that that call is being made, or if the whole thing works or doesn't work.
Yeah. Yeah. I can't say. I haven't tested for it, so.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Tweaks that's needed.
So our next one here is Mason Jar, and this is his email address. If you have questions, you can ping him. It's going to give us a review on classes. Let me bear with me for a second here. Let me find him. This tool is awesome, but it's got so many different windows to find things. So Mason, all right. So I'm going to unmute him, and then I believe if I stop sharing, and now Mason, are you able to speak? Nope.
No.
We couldn't hear you there. Can you give it another try?
Hello.
There you go.
Oh, okay.
Hi.
Hi.
And then go ahead and remember, if you click share screen, I don't think I make you presenter. I think, make host.
Yeah, it looks like I can.
There we go. Jackie, you're seeing that?
Yeah, I'm seeing that just fine.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay. All right, so classes in AutoHotkey are significantly easier than most compiled languages. Like, I learned it in C++. It's not nearly as rigid. There's not as many details to it. It does follow the same kind of syntax and usability. So the purpose of a class is kind of like a function. It's meant to be reused, and they're essentially a group of functions and variables. Oops. The declaration is fairly simple. It's just a class, and then you state the name of the class, which can be whatever, just the same as the same naming convention as a variable. And they will always be within curly brackets. Very similar to a function.
Yeah, but you don't have any parameter definitions, right?
No, there are no. Well, not in the definition. No. When you call them, you may use parameters if you set it up to allow them to process the parameters. In this case, this is just a small example of a regular variable which will only be made if you instantiate the class. So in AutoHotkey, I do not know if this is the same for other languages, but in AutoHotkey, if it is not a static variable within a class, then you must instantiate it to be able to use it. But you can use methods and static variables of a class without needing to instantiate it.
So if you wanted to instantiate var1, what would you do?
To instantiate it, I would define a variable and then say new space the name of the class, which I think is right here.
Yeah.
What will be inside the class is this meta function. It does not need to be, none of these meta functions are required to be in the class. They are already there by default, but you may state them to have them do something customized. Typically, when you call it new, it will not have any parameters to take in because there's nothing to handle those parameters. But if you explicitly state new in the class, then you may or may not use parameters depending on how you have it set up. And then delete is when you destroy all references to an object, this meta function is called. By default, all it does is deallocate the space. Unless you state, if you give it something, then you can tell it like I wrote a class for Internet Explorer and COM, and what I can have it do, or what I did have it do, is when I delete all the references, it will close the windows, any open IE objects that it had open. And then we have get, set, and call. These are, whenever you reference them, you don't explicitly state these. When you say you want to access a variable within the class, if you just want to get the contents from it, it'll call get. By default, all it does is reference it directly. Otherwise, you can have it process through whatever parameters, and then just kind of like a normal method. The same goes for set, except that is when you are writing to a variable. And then call is, I believe, I probably should have looked that up. I've never used call.
Call isn't that the same if you want to call a specific method in a?
That is what I would believe it to be, yes. So you would call the name of the method with the parameters.
Yeah.
Just like you normally would in any other object that has method. And then there are properties. I've also never had a use for properties. It is actually, I can't, for some reason I'm drawing a blank.
That sometimes happens. So yeah, properties, I wouldn't have gotten into that myself either. But properties would be, yeah, well, I've normally seen them as methods, but if a function has a property, probably that's how I would normally have seen it. But I've never really used them, so I would be almost as blank as you.
Yes, I just can't recall it at the moment.
Well, so correct me if I'm wrong here, because like I said, I've used classes, but I wrote one a long time ago when I was just trying to learn them, but I never got into it. But a property is going to be like a value that you store. Is that what it's doing?
Yeah, I would say that if I had a class and I made, let's say, a new car, one of its properties would be its color. Mm-hmm. So here I would call a specific method that would give me a specific car, and I would be able to set that car's properties. But to me, that's almost just like setting different variables on the car. So I'm not sure. I'm not seeing the differentiation, but that's just me.
Well, and then also, because in the previous slide, and just when you were talking about it, there was methods, and that's, if I remember right, methods are functions, right, inside of a class. So right? Okay. Because this is where, like you're saying, Jackie, the terminology changes. It doesn't necessarily mean what it does is really different. It's just that inside a class they're called certain things. But how, the structure and being able to have things, and then let's say you have default values. You want to give a certain, what we used a car earlier, right? I want to say, hey, all my cars start off, they default to be red, and they have 4 wheels, and they have whatever. And then you might do something to update that for that instance, right? But yeah, I'm just getting into like, often it seems so mystical to me because there was all this different stuff, but the different things really weren't that different, right?
No.
And Mason, earlier you were mentioning it's very similar to an object, and you're doing stuff with objects. It's just that they have different names inside of a class.
Yes, and I'm reading the chat real quick, and what if it come back up? There it goes. It is very similar to these meta functions.
What is a meta function?
A meta function is a function or a method that already exists within any default object.
Oh, okay.
But you may explicitly state them to define them if you like.
So I was getting a little confused there also when you were showing this, and you were saying, actually I loved how you explained the delete, right? That like, hey, when you basically shut it down, it's going to free up memory, and this is the method it calls, or whatever you want to call it, to do that, right? That's built into it. You don't have to declare this because that's built into classes. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, it's not built into classes. It is built into objects. So if you instantiate any object,
Oh, okay.
It'll always be in there.
Okay.
Yeah, it's kind of what's going on behind the scene when you say, I'm just going with the car once again, because I don't know, I think I learned it with cars at one point. If you have a car and you use the dot syntax, you have car and you have dot color and you have the colon equal sign, and you put in some value for the color. What it's actually doing is it's calling the meta function set with a key, which is color, and a value, which is the actual color that you're setting. So behind the scenes, it's actually calling the set meta function, but you're not seeing it. You're just using the dot syntax that you're used to.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't have anything more to that.
All right. Yes, that is exactly how it works. Yes. Was that clear for everybody? I wasn't totally.
I think that if one reviews it, it probably will be. I'm not sure.
Well, and from my experiences, it just takes practice, right? I know when I looked at these years ago, I finally got to where like I overall understood what was going on, but you start off with the basics and it's not too bad, and then you start doing some advanced stuff, and I started getting very confused.
Well, fortunately, there's not a whole lot to these, and I've written quite a few. I've never actually used properties, The only meta functions I've used are new and delete. And even then, most of the time, you don't need those.
Yeah, sounds about right.
Okay.
So I have, because you were at least done with what you had to present, right, Mason? Or was there more?
Yes, there's more.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Go for it.
We have nested and extended classes. Nested classes are, it's example, the class 3 is a nested class. And that just means that it is a class written literally within another class. And this can give the syntax of object.object. So it's a little way to organize it a little better. If you have a very large class and you have a lot of different groups of methods, and then you can also extend them, which uses one class as a base class, meaning here, class 2, when you instantiate class 2, var 1 from class 1 will be accessible and in that object. And that goes for any methods or other variables that are in first class. Now, one thing that kind of confused me when I was working with nested classes was how to instantiate it properly. So what I did do was I extended it in the top class and then had the nested class in there, so I could, it is a little redundant, but otherwise not everything gets instantiated correctly. There's a thread on it, I can link to that a little later, that it explains that a little better.
Well, yeah, I would love to have a simple explanation for instantiate.
For instantiate, I did not actually put that in there, but I was going to just type it out. What is showing on the screen right now?
Black, almost square.
Yeah, I think maybe you shared your application and not your desktop, is my guess.
Correct.
Yeah. So you should be able to go back to share, maybe even say stop sharing and then reshare the other thing.
This should work.
There you go.
Okay. So I just use Notepad++.
Mm-hmm.
It's super light and easy. A little bit. So to instantiate a class, let's see. So to instantiate a class, we're gonna put it into a variable, and we'll state new, which calls the meta function new of the class, and then the name of the class. Very simply, this creates a reference. It creates the object and then puts the reference of the object into variable 1. Let me give my examples.
Uh-oh. There we go.
Okay. Oh, did it disappear?
Yeah, it's all right.
Oh.
Interesting sound.
Oh, is my keyboard loud?
No, no, it was some kind of noise. I don't know where it came from.
Oh. Let me just do this. Okay, I should have it actually reference something.
Right.
Okay, so okay. So this should display.
Can you make the font bigger, please?
Yeah,
Yeah, that's better. There we go.
okay. So what this will do is it will instantiate this class into the variable, and then we can call it using standard dot syntax, and it will show the variable reference. Basic call. So if we do not instantiate it, if we just comment that out, it will come up blank. However, if we reference if we reference it directly, even if it's not instantiated and it's a static variable, it will still be accessible.
Yeah, so if you turn the second message box into var1 instead, it would actually be blank if you commented out the first one, because of course the var1 is an empty variable that it's calling now that you have commented out the new class.
Correct.
Yeah,
So yeah,
so
if I referenced it directly,
yeah, it would still be blank.
it would still be blank because it is not instantiated.
Yes.
The statics are always instantiated when the variable or when the script is ran, when it's first ran.
Yeah. So, and I saw, I forget who asked it, but I mean, this is one of the things, this is also why I haven't really dove deep into classes, because I'm like, okay, I get at least some of what you're saying, right? No, and that's no diss on you. That's just me, right? Because I'm not a programmer. But I get the overall, some of the concepts. What I'm trying to think through of like, why would I bother to create a class instead of, just using an object? What's the benefit?
Okay, I can show a very real example of that.
Awesome.
It's here somewhere.
And for the rest of the people in the webinar, in the resources that I'll show later on and send out later, I found a lynda.com course. Whoa, bless you. talking about classes, not necessarily with AutoHotkey, right, but just in general. And it did a nice summary. And one of the things they mentioned that helped me in my head at least get the concept a bit better was the relationship between a class and like the objects and stuff is the class is the blueprint, right? It's the structure or a template of the actual thing. It's not the thing itself.
Correct. This is basically exactly that. You're building a blueprint, and then when you call new, that is it actually being built.
Yeah.
So, and help me understand that. So that new on line 4, is that new for the whole class, or is that that's a specific method?
That is for the whole class. That is a meta function. Whenever you
Okay.
instantiate this class, it will always call that.
Oh.
And so, because of the nature of this class, what I want it to do is always be able to see hidden windows.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have it return this. There is another instance where you do not need to return it. I can't immediately recall what it is, but in this case, if you do not return this, this is a reference to the object itself once it's instantiated. So that allows it to reference itself, its own methods and variables.
And correct me if I'm wrong. The word "this" is a special keyword for it, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
It's not a variable I made up or anything. Yes,
Right.
it was always there, and it is what you expect to have as a reference in this. So class name, or sorry, bar 1 here would be identical to this,
Mm-hmm.
meaning that they're both referencing the same object, but this is always just the reference of its own object. And if you do not return that reference in this case, then you will not be able to actually reference it because you didn't save the reference.
I
don't think that's true. I think you don't have to return this. This is returned automatically. Now, if you return something else other than this, that's what will be passed back to the new statement. But if you just eliminate that return this, you will get the reference back to the thing that called new.
That is correct. By default, it will return this. I stated it explicitly. I don't remember why.
No worries. Yeah.
You got to be really careful with returns in classes because, like for set and get, returns do very specific things.
Can you give us an example of where we would go awry? You know.
Well, with set and get, you use the return to actually intervene. So if you're setting a property and you let's say you never want, let's say you set a property called property, but you don't want that term property to actually get the assignment. You want underscore property instead. Then you return the one you want as opposed to allowing it to set the value into the variable called property. So
okay, I think I followed that. Yeah. All right.
Yeah, I kind of think I did as well. I would say that the return is something that you would use before the end of the actual meta function to have it return something that is not the default. Is that what we're saying?
yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that is especially important in get and set, especially if you want to create private variables, which is not technically implemented in AutoHotkey, but if you did specify it to, like if they tried to call a specific variable, you could do a check for it and then just ignore it or return nothing. in that case. Which I would prefer to have a private section. That would be nice, but doing that method works just as well.
And then, so one of the reasons why you opened up this file anyway was the whole point of like, why would one create a class? And so you're going into how you're using it, which is still fine, right? Don't get me wrong. But I think I'm also like getting like, as with an object, it's a lot of things related to an IE object, right? That you want to perform different things on that thing that you're looking at, the class.
Correct. So this actually works relatively well because it is already an object when you create an Inner Explorer instance in COM that is an object. So I created an object for that object to make things work a little easier. So you reference it exactly the same, so you have one more prefix because you'd have to reference the object first, but then you could then, I have it always saved to WB. So if you instantiated it as WB, then it would be WB.WB, and then you can access it directly, like you could do .document and then do a search or whatever. So you can work with it directly, and there's also helper functions, essentially.
Yeah, the way I would explain it is there's two basic uses for classes. One is when you want to basically set up a template that you're going to instantiate multiple times and let them operate independently. The other is when you just want to have a collection of functions. For instance, I have a class that I call Excel, and in it, it does not have an underscore new meta function because you don't instantiate it, but you can invoke all of its methods by just saying Excel dot and then the method name, and it kind of just groups them all together in one place. It'd be the same thing as setting up a file called Excel and then have Excel underscore then the name of a function and just having a group of functions in a file. So that's the two ways I use classes.
Yes, I would agree with both of those. The group of functions, there's actually a really good example. If anybody knows Crypt by can't remember his name at the moment, but the Crypt library is exactly that. You do not have to instantiate it. You just use it all directly, and essentially making it a large group of functions, but it's more of a hierarchy to give it some better structure and make it a little easier to use.
Correct, and you don't use, and in that case, you don't use the keyword this, because it's just a collection of functions, and all the variables in the functions are not persistent like they are in if you instantiate a class. Then you use the keyword this, and all those variables are persistent with for that instantiation.
Correct. In the case of not instantiating it, there wouldn't even be a this.
Correct.
I did actually design this in the first way you mentioned, in that you're able to use multiple instances of it at the same time. Specifically, and this is what I would consider very messy, but it is the only way I found for it to actually open in private. I won't really get into that. It's not too important, but it's just the fact that it is in private, that the session is isolated to itself as the browser, and then if you opened new ones, every different iteration of this object would have a separate process for Internet Explorer in private. And then there are just some basic functions for it, which is the WeightLoad function, a navigate function. Because
why would you have a navigate function? I'm unsure of. Don't the object already have a navigate function?
Yes, it does. The problem with it, though, is by default, it does not wait for the page to load, and
He's passing the user agent there too, which is nice to be able to do.
yes.
Yeah, but does navigate already allow for that?
It uses the actual navigate function, or
Yeah, I see that. Yeah, okay.
yes.
Okay, so it's just a grouping together of other methods. So you have the navigate in there, but you have the WeightLoad as well, so you don't need to use 2 lines each time in the script. And you also have a check for timeout and stuff like that. Yeah, I see that. Okay.
It gives it a little more functionality because, from my experiences, by default, the Internet Explorer COM object is not very user-friendly, and it breaks very frequently if you do just one thing a little weird. But this WeightLoad, the reason I don't have it directly in the navigate to URL is in cases that you want to click something on the page, then you would just go and use the WeightLoad function instead.
Mm-hmm.
So when it deletes, when you remove all references, it will run this dot quit, which is down here. It's just referencing another method, which simply kills the process.
And that works better than actually using the quit of the IE object?
Yes, I have found that it works considerably better.
Mm-hmm.
Especially because when you use quit, if you try to open another one too quickly, it will say that there is a system shutdown in progress,
Mm-hmm.
which is not the case.
I think the important point for this webinar, though, is that it allows him to, basically put together a grouping of things he wants to do and easily call them, right?
Yeah. And that's also why I'm asking to the things that are already there. Why would he create his own function for it? And he just answered that because he can actually group the process close together here in a method where the object already holds the info needed to do it. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I had one for the next one as well because I've seen him store the process ID a couple of times, and I just thought that he might have gotten the IE object using the process ID, but instead he uses the URL of the page, which of course works just fine. But I just had an idea that it might be possible to actually compare the two instead of actually comparing the URL of the newly created IE, but yeah.
Well, I did try several different methods in place of this. The first one I used was for the actual window ID,
Mm-hmm.
But it did not work. And I'm not entirely sure why.
Mm-hmm.
I believe it is because within Internet Explorer, you have the parent process, and then the actual page is a child process.
Yeah, I know, especially when you go private with the stuff, and also when you have the medium version of the Oh my God, I just forgot the actual English word for it. So, yeah, just continue. I have nothing more to it. You have, of course, tested what you're now using.
Yes. This works. I've actually included something on my GitHub. Something I don't remember.
Let me ask a question here, just in general, because and I don't think MixedRace is on this webinar, but he has some classes I've been using, and I know one thing I've run into is when I'm trying to use a class, you know, I will go to call on it, and I usually have methods or sorry, functions, and I use an include command. And what was weird was when I'm in my script and I try to use the class, even though for whatever reason I screwed something up, right? It doesn't tell me, like when the method, it doesn't know it, it'll tell me right away. AutoHotkey tells me that, like, hey, that function doesn't exist, right? But it seems like with classes, I don't get a warning or something. Does that sound familiar at all?
Yes. So you're, like, if I were to try and instantiate a class that did not exist, is that what you mean?
Well, it isn't. See, I don't know, because I'm just, you know, calling something that's leveraging a class. I'm not instantiating anything.
Yeah,
Right.
I think what Joe is saying is you invoke a method that doesn't exist within the class. It silently just moves on. It doesn't complain and let you know. Lexicos had a way of fixing that. He had a really neat. I'm trying to find it right now. I use it, and it works quite well. And I think you can search for it on the
Forum.
What you can do is you can set up a class. Let's see. It's called throws non-existent method. That's what it's called. Throws non-existent method, all one word.
Okay.
If you search that on the forum, you'll find a thread where Lexicos talks about adding that to your classes, and then it'll complain.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah, it was one of those things that just really confused me, and I was totally trying to troubleshoot the wrong thing because it didn't complain like normal things do. But anyway, thank you.
Yeah, I've noticed that as well, and I'm not entirely sure why that happens either. I've never
Too
had.
bad Lexicos isn't online. He'd correct us all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no doubt about that.
I hope, yeah, that would be awesome.
He's my hero, by the way.
I think he's a lot of people's heroes. Yeah.
I could imagine that, yeah.
Did we get to some point here, or move on, or what are we doing?
I am not particularly sure at this moment. I've pretty much explained most of it. Are there any questions, anything I might have missed?
I think that was a good, intro.
Yeah.
I learned some
Yeah.
Awesome. Let's do this. How about pass it back to me? I have one more slide to show, just with some resources I put together, and I will update especially with the info that was just shared with us, and I'll add that to the deck. And then when we send out our stuff, I will include those in those resources.
Yeah, and we're also getting up on the first hour.
That was what I thought. Is let me wrap up with this, and then we'll stop the recording and then restart it, and then we can chit chat. And if people have, questions about classes, great. If they have other questions, that's fine too. So here I just did some research, Here's just, of course, the documentation around classes. There were a couple tutorials on classes. There was also a video from About Script on objects when he touched on classes. And this is the video I mentioned that did a pretty good job overall. It's not AutoHotkey specific, but it took a higher level of what classes are and why you'd be using them kind of approach.
Yeah.
All right. So let me stop the recording. And then, where did that go? Stop.